Imagine standing on a causeway at dawn, the water on either side of you perfectly still, and ahead of you rises a city that should not exist. A metropolis built in the middle of a lake, larger than Paris, cleaner than London, and more dazzling than anything the men who would soon destroy it had ever seen in their lives. This was Tenochtitlan, and in 1519, it had less than 2 years left to live. Long before skyscrapers, before steel, before anyone in Europe believed a city could float on water, the Aztec people did exactly that. They took a swampy, mosquito-ridden island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, a place so undesirable that no one else wanted it, and turned it into one of the largest, most sophisticated cities on Earth. By the early 1500s, somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 people called this island home. To put that in perspective, that made Tenochtitlan larger than Venice, larger than Rome, larger than almost every city in Europe at the time. It had running water. It had organized waste removal. It had public education. It had a marketplace so vast and so orderly that Spanish soldiers who later saw it said they had never witnessed anything like it, not even in the great cities of Spain. And in less than 2 years, it would be gone, burned, buried, erased so thoroughly that for centuries, many doubted it had ever truly existed the way the old accounts described. Today, we walk through it. We walk through Tenochtitlan as it was in its final golden years, before the ships arrived, before the gunpowder, before the silence. This is the city the conquistadors found, and this is the city they destroyed. To understand Tenochtitlan, you first have to understand the impossible decision that created it. In the early 1300s, the Mexica people, wanderers, outsiders, unwelcome in the fertile lands already claimed by more powerful neighbors, arrived at the edge of Lake Texcoco. According to their own legend, their god had promised them a sign, an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. They found that exact image on a small, swampy island in the middle of the lake. It was not a gift. It was the only land nobody else wanted. So they built anyway. They drove wooden piles into the lake bed. They wove reeds and packed mud into floating gardens called chinampas, anchoring them with willow trees whose roots eventually fused the artificial islands to the lake floor. Layer by layer, garden by garden, they expanded their impossible city outward into open water. 2 centuries later, that swamp had become the beating heart of an empire. 3 massive causeways connected the island to the mainland, wide enough for 10 horses to ride side by side. Canals ran through the city like streets, and canoes moved through them constantly, carrying maize, flowers, pottery, people. Where Venice had its gondolas, Tenochtitlan had thousands of canoes gliding silently beneath wooden footbridges. And rising above it all, visible from miles across the water, stood the Templo Mayor, a pyramid over 40 meters tall, painted in blazing red and blue, crowned with twin shrines that caught the first light of every sunrise. This was not a primitive settlement that Europeans stumbled upon. This was a marvel of engineering that many of them couldn't fully explain, because nothing back home looked like it. Walk north from the central plaza, across one of the wide avenues, and you arrive at a sound before you arrive at a place. A low roar of thousands of voices layered over each other, punctuated by laughter, haggling, and the calls of vendors. This is Tlatelolco, the greatest market in the Americas. Spanish soldiers who later stood here, men who had seen the markets of Seville and Constantinople, described this place with something close to disbelief. One eyewitness claimed that 60,000 people passed through on an ordinary trading day. On feast days, the number climbed even higher. Every inch of the plaza is organized, not chaotic, not crowded at random, but arranged into distinct sections enforced by market officials who patrol constantly, watching for theft, settling disputes, ensuring fair measurements. In one section, mountains of maize, beans, squash, and chili peppers in more varieties than you can count. In another, cacao beans, so valuable they function as currency, traded by the handful for goods, by the sack for fortunes. Walk further and you find gold ornaments, jade carvings, feathers from birds brought hundreds of miles from tropical lowlands, jaguar pelts, obsidian blades sharper than any European steel. There are healers selling herbal remedies, scribes selling their services to record transactions, barbers, porters, slaves being sold in one regulated corner. A grim reminder that for all its order and beauty, Tenochtitlan was not a utopia. A Spanish soldier walking through here for the first time would have felt something unfamiliar and uncomfortable. Not awe at finding savages, as they expected, but awe at finding something equal to, and in some ways greater than, what they had left behind in Europe. That discomfort would matter later. It would shape what came next. But step away from the market, and the rhythm of the city changes completely. Here, along the smaller canals, life moves slower. A woman kneels at the edge of a chinampa, tending rows of maize and tomatoes growing in soil built up over generations of lake mud and decayed vegetation. Her children play nearby, occasionally diving into the canal to cool off in the midday heat. Men paddle canoes loaded with firewood toward the city center, their routes as familiar to them as any street. Fishermen cast nets for the small fish that fill the lake, while others hunt waterfowl with surprising precision, using blowguns and nets stretched across narrow channels. The homes here are modest compared to the palaces near the temple complex. Single-story structures made of adobe brick, often built directly at the water's edge, with small docks for canoes. Smoke rises gently from cooking fires, carrying the smell of maize tortillas and roasting chili. Education here is mandatory, and this surprised the Spanish more than almost anything else. Every child, regardless of class, attended school. Commoners learned trades, military discipline, and civic duty at institutions called telpacali. The nobility sent their children to more rigorous academies called calmacac, where they studied astronomy, history, religious doctrine, and the complex Aztec calendar system. This was a society that valued literacy and structure as deeply as it valued warfare and religion. And religion touched everything. At the absolute center of the city stood the Templo Mayor, and around its base, the spiritual heart of the entire empire. To the Aztecs, the sun did not rise automatically each morning. It rose because it was sustained, through ritual, through offering, through blood. Their cosmology held that the universe existed in a fragile, ongoing balance, and humans bore the responsibility of maintaining it. This belief produced extraordinary art, extraordinary architecture, and rituals that horrified the Spanish when they witnessed them firsthand. Human sacrifice was not hidden in Tenochtitlan. It was public, ceremonial, and deeply woven into civic life. Priests, their bodies painted black, climbed the steep temple steps in processions watched by thousands. The scale of these ceremonies, particularly during major festivals, would later become one of the most repeated justifications the Spanish used to defend the conquest. But it's worth pausing here, because flattening this into simple savagery misses the complexity entirely. This was a civilization capable of precise astronomical calculations, capable of running an empire of subject states stretching across central Mexico, capable of building cities that stunned seasoned European travelers, and it also practiced ritual violence on a scale that, by modern standards, is genuinely difficult to process. Both of these things were true at once. Standing in the plaza below the temple, watching smoke rise from the eternal fires kept burning at its summit, you would have felt the full weight of a civilization utterly convinced that the fate of the sun itself rested in their hands. By 1519, Tenochtitlan was ruled by Moctezuma II, ninth emperor of the Aztec Empire, a man who governed from a palace so vast that conquistador accounts describe getting lost within its corridors. His palace held aviaries filled with birds gathered from every corner of the empire, quetzal, macaws, hummingbirds, kept purely for their beauty. A separate building housed a zoo, with jaguars, pumas, and other animals maintained by full-time keepers. There were botanical gardens organized by region and climate, essentially an empire's worth of biodiversity curated in one location. Moctezuma himself was rarely seen by commoners. When he moved through the city, attendants swept the ground before him and laid down cloth so his feet would never touch bare earth. This was a ruler at the absolute height of his power, commanding tribute from hundreds of subject cities, presiding over an empire that, from where he stood, showed no signs of weakness. And then, in November of 1519, word reached him that strange men had arrived on the eastern coast, pale-skinned, bearded, riding animals no one in Mexico had ever seen. wielding weapons that could kill from a distance. Moctezuma made a decision that would haunt the rest of Aztec history. He invited them in. When Hernán Cortés and his men finally crossed the causeway into Tenochtitlan on November 8, 1519, accounts from both sides describe something extraordinary: total, stunned silence. The Spanish, exhausted from months of marching and fighting their way across Mexico, found themselves staring at a city more impressive than anything they had imagined finding in the so-called New World. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, a soldier who later wrote one of the most detailed accounts of the conquest, described his men wondering aloud whether what they were seeing was real or whether they had stumbled into a dream. The Aztecs, meanwhile, watched 400 armed strangers walk into the heart of their empire, escorted by thousands of indigenous allies who had their own long-standing grievances against Aztec rule. For weeks, an uneasy peace held. Cortés was housed in luxury. Gifts were exchanged. The Spanish were given a tour of the city, of the market, of the temple, and every step deepened both their admiration and their hunger. But underneath the courtesy, something else was happening. Cortés took Moctezuma hostage within his own palace, ruling the city indirectly through a captured emperor too proud, or too paralyzed, to resist openly. The arrangement was fragile from the beginning, and fragile arrangements, in a city this proud, never last. By the summer of 1520, the peace had completely collapsed. A massacre during a religious festival, ordered by one of Cortés's subordinates while Cortés himself was away dealing with a rival Spanish force, turned simmering Aztec anger into open rebellion. The streets that had once carried traders and canoes now carried warriors. Moctezuma, brought out to calm his own people, was killed in the chaos. Whether by Spanish hands or by his own outraged subjects remains disputed to this day. The Spanish, now trapped inside a hostile city of hundreds of thousands, made a desperate decision. They would flee in the night. On the night of June 30th, 1520, Cortés and his remaining men attempted to escape across one of the causeways under cover of darkness, weighed down with looted gold. The Aztecs discovered them almost immediately. What followed became known to the Spanish as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Warriors attacked from canoes on both sides of the causeway, picking off soldiers struggling under the weight of their stolen treasure. Many drowned, dragged under by gold they refused to release even as they died. Cortés escaped. Most of his army did not. It should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. Cortés regrouped. He rebuilt his forces. And critically, he allied with tens of thousands of warriors from rival indigenous states, peoples who had spent generations under Aztec domination and saw, in the Spanish, an opportunity for liberation that would instead become something far darker. In May of 1521, the siege of Tenochtitlan began. For nearly 3 months, the city that had once amazed its conquerors was slowly strangled. Causeways were cut, fresh water sources were destroyed, and a far deadlier enemy than any soldier had already entered the city months earlier, invisible and unstoppable, smallpox. The disease tore through a population with no immunity to it, killing with a speed and scale that warfare alone never could. Some historians estimate that smallpox killed a greater portion of Tenochtitlan's population than the siege itself. Block by block, canal by canal, the city fell. The Templo Mayor, once visible for miles, was eventually buried beneath rubble and Spanish construction. The canals were filled in. The chinampas abandoned. The markets silenced. On August 13, 1521, the last Aztec emperor, Cuauhtémoc, was captured attempting to flee by canoe across the lake. Tenochtitlan, the floating city that had taken 2 centuries to build, fell in under 2 years. What the Spanish found that morning in 1519 was not a primitive outpost waiting to be civilized. It was one of the great cities of the world, engineered, organized, educated, and devastatingly beautiful, built by people who turned an unwanted swamp into an empire's capital through nothing but persistence and ingenuity. And what they destroyed, in less than 2 years, took centuries to even partially understand again. Today, Mexico City sits where Tenochtitlan once stood. The Templo Mayor lies beneath its streets, fragments of it rediscovered by accident during construction projects centuries later. The lake itself is mostly gone, drained over generations. But the city is not entirely erased. Look closely enough in the layout of certain streets, in the artifacts still being unearthed beneath modern buildings, and you can still trace the outline of what was once there. History never truly disappears. It just waits to be uncovered. If this journey through a lost world captivated you, make sure you're subscribed, because there are more vanished cities, more forgotten empires, more stories waiting beneath the surface of history. And in the comments, tell us, which lost city or civilization should we walk through next?